The Forest City Killer is a chilling yet not quite proven chapter in London's history. In the 1960s, a series of unsolved murders haunted the city, earning the grim nickname. The victims included young women and boys who were abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered, leaving the community in fear. The cases we'll be talking about today are the murders of Jackie English, Jacqueline Dunleavy, Linda White, Soraya O'Connell, Frankie Jensen, Scott Leishman, Helga Beer, and Bruce Stapleton. Despite extensive investigations, the identity of the killer remains unknown, and the causes continue to intrigue true crime enthusiasts and investigators alike. The tale from the Chesterfield today is about London.
Well, welcome.
Yes. As you can see, we're in a completely new setup. We're on my Chesterfield here in lovely sunny Florida. You may see a visitor or two walking on through. They are very interested in what we're doing. Happy November, everyone. I hope everyone had a wonderful November. Happy Thanksgiving week. If you are American, it is Thanksgiving week. I'm really sorry if my cat's getting a little bit of a scuff right now. They can be jealous. If you're watching this, you can see that they're both here. The fat one is Tubby, and this little hidden one is Nugget.
It's starting.
And it's starting. Tubby's a very jealous baby. Yeah, I know. So, welcome everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy everything. We have spent this week planning and really making some good, solid plans. So, Buy Me a Coffee starts in a mere 6 days. All of Bunk Bed Banter, all of Oddities are up there for your listening pleasure. If you become a Chesterfield, someone from the Chesterfield Society, which we hope you will. It really helps us out, keeps it going. We are writer, editor, producer, all of the ers in this. So it really just helps support us and keep us going. So we love doing it. We want to continue doing it. Hopefully this is a great transition off of Patreon. If you were a Patreon, you will notice that it is shut down. It is no more because we did not want everyone to have to pay a bunch of crazy fees to enjoy our bonus content. So with that, we're going to be traveling to good old London, Ontario.
Which we've been.
Many
times.
Yes, many times.
So it's going to be interesting hearing about a city that I know well. One of my best friends went to school in London, so I visited many times. So I'm interested, but I know that you struggled with this episode.
I did. I struggled with this episode. We'll get into it, but I'm excited to hear what you guys all think. If you think that there was the Forest City Killer, or was it just a really dangerous spot with many different killers? And then I kind of say my opinion at the end.
That's so interesting because we sat here today together writing separate episodes for December. And the episode that I did has become this 2-part massive nonsense case about outlaw biker gangs. And a lot of it happens in Ontario from like the 1960s to present day. So I'm really interested to see if there's any sort of crossover, or I feel like there's potentially some things that we can take from this episode and banter about in the next few episodes.
Okay.
Because I think it probably all ties in together. I'm really curious.
Awesome. I'm excited. I'm excited to hear what you guys all think. When we focus a lot on the victims today, they're very different, as you heard in the intro. They're all different. There's both genders. They're all different ages. Let's get into it.
If you Google a modern day London, Ontario, you will, or should I say, can fall down many Reddit rabbit holes, just like what we were talking about with my episodes, having absolutely nothing to do with this. And it's all about why people think it's so dangerous nowadays. But back in 1959 to 1984, London was thought to be the serial killer capital of the world. But there may have been a killer hunting the people of London in the 1960s that wouldn't be connected until 2019, when Vanessa released her book, For a City Killer, a sleuth's hunt for the truth. In this book, Vanessa links together various murders throughout this time in London. We're going to go through these victims. As you listen, try to decide for yourself if you believe that they are indeed connected.
On January 6th, 1956, 6-year-old Susan Cadieux was playing with her friends and siblings at the playground of St. Mary's School, not far away from her home. At approximately 7:45 p.m., a man approached Susan and mentioned he had something for her. To ease the children's minds, he claimed to live nearby and said that he was at the school to meet with their priest at St. Mary's. Susan seemed to have no reason to fear the man and started walking away with him. Coincidentally, one of the other children slipped and fell on the ice, causing a brief commotion that distracted them from Susan and the stranger. When the other children regained their focus, Susan was gone. After 15 minutes passed without her return, her brothers became alarmed and ran home to alert their parents. Throughout the night, police and local residents searched for the missing child. The next morning at 10 a.m., Susan Cadieux's body was discovered behind a construction company building. She was missing the jeans she had worn beneath her snowsuit pants, and her underwear was torn. The cause of death was determined to be exposure, though a lace from an army boot was tied around her neck. The other children described the man who led Susan away as a tall, thin, unshaven, white male in his 30s to 40s, dressed in a light brown overcoat, black galoshes, and a fur hat with ear flaps. No one has ever been arrested in the case of Susan Cadieux. A man described very similar to the suspect that led Susan away that day was also described in the murder of Linda White.
16-year-old Jacqueline Dunleavy lived and attended school in London, Ontario. She also had a part-time job 2 or 3 evenings a week after classes. She worked the counter in an eclectic bodega-style shop called the Stanley Variety, where one could buy anything from cigarettes to candy, from housewares to pornographic photos, maybe a few magazines.
Mm-hmm.
The store, owned by Joe Clark, was also a neighborhood hangout for all sorts of disreputable characters. From kids who used the establishment to hide stolen items, to older men who sipped coffees, flirted with the high school girls who worked there, and occasionally went into the back to watch some of Joe Clark's bootleg stag films. On January 9th, the Tuesday evening, Jacqueline was closing the store around 6:15 p.m. as she usually did. After locking up, she walked across the street and down 2 blocks to the Beaconsfield bus stop, where several witnesses saw her waiting for the bus to arrive. Minutes later, though, another witness stated that she saw Jacqueline getting into a white Chrysler, though she couldn't tell who was driving the car. Jacqueline's parents began to worry when she hadn't arrived home by 7 p.m., and they began making phone calls to all of her friends, none of whom had any idea where she could have gone. Shortly thereafter, the young woman's father, who was a police officer, got into his own vehicle and began driving around town looking for her, though he could see no sign of her anywhere.
Later, and about 12 kilometers away from where Jacqueline had disappeared, 3 boys pulled their car into the parking lot of Oak Ridge Plaza and discovered the gruesome remains of Jacqueline. The left side of her face had been bashed in, and the scarf that had been used to throttle her was still around her neck. Her clothes had been torn off and thrown around her body, and her skin was covered in small scratches, as if from fingernails. Jacqueline's winter coat was found near her remains, stained with vomit and semen, though the victim had not been raped. She had also been grotesquely posed after death, lying stiffly on her back with her eyes open, her legs closed, and her arms straight at her sides, as though she was on a mortuary slab. Most grisly of all, though, was the fact that the coroner discovered a plastic wrapped pack of pink facial tissues had been placed in her throat post mortem, as if some kind of ritualistic flourish. Whoever had killed Jacqueline had clearly not been particularly concerned about being seen or about the body being found quickly. Jacqueline's remains had not been concealed, and the parking lot where she was found was often busy, even on cold winter nights. Deep marks in the snow suggested that the perpetrator not only dragged Jacqueline's body about 50 feet from his vehicle to the spot where she was dumped, but had also returned the car afterwards to retrieve her backpack and boots, which he carried back to the dump site and discarded near her corpse. Police were able to obtain clear tire impressions from the vehicle driven by the murderer, which indicated the car bore 4 different makes of tires whose tread depths were all different, and that the vehicle's alignment was so bad that the detectives were amazed that the car could maneuver at all, especially on snowy roads.
Because the vehicle could have been so distinctive, authorities were confident they would have no trouble tracking it down, and set about examining every car within a several-mile radius, looking for a junker with 4 mismatched and misaligned tires. Frustratingly, they turned up nothing at all. The Stanley variety, where Jacqueline had been working for a little more than a month, seemed quite a promising venue for possible suspects. And only a few days into the investigation, several regulars of the sketchy little establishment were looked into. One of these was a middle-aged man who often came into the store to watch stag films with that owner, Joe Clark, in the back room. This individual had reportedly made advances towards Jacqueline, as well as some of the other teenage girls who were employed at the Stanley Variety, and he was known to be a violent drunk. It also seems significant that his own wife was only 16 years old. Nothing ever came from the suspicions, and Jacqueline's killer remains unknown.
So far, no similarities in victims.
Not at all.
Drop site. There's a car. That's about it. That's all we got so far. So just want to keep, so we're kind of going through.
Going on the same page here.
Susan was found. I will say Susan was found very quickly after her death, as was Jacqueline. So that is one little
minor thread
that keeps us together.
Okay.
On Friday, August 14th, 1970, Soraya O'Connell attended a community dance regularly held at the youth center near Fanshawe Park Road and Highbury Ave. She left the recreation center around 9:45 p.m., and this is the last time anyone would see her alive. Her father called the police at around 1 a.m. to report her missing. A constable was dispatched to get the description of Soraya. They went to the youth center to look for her, and by the next morning, the only sign of Soraya the police had discovered was her brown and white purse. An investigation into her disappearance began immediately, and the police issued a province-wide alert to law enforcement agencies to keep their eyes peeled for Soraya. Her remains were later found outside of Stratford, Ontario on May 26, 1974, and her case remains still unsolved.
A little after 8 a.m. on Friday, February 9th, 1968, 9-year-old Frankie Jensen, bundled against the cold and carrying his lunchbox, set off for school. Despite not wanting to go due to issues with bullies, his parents and siblings encouraged him to continue his routine and not let the bullies intimidate him. Typically, Frankie's older sister would accompany him on his kilometer walk to school, but she was running late that day, so Frankie set off alone for Westdale Elementary. The wooded path he took was a common shortcut for children, and although a few boys had reported being chased by adult men along the path, these reports weren't taken seriously. The police assume the culprits were escapees from the nearby Harley School for the Developmentally Disabled or the Children's Psychiatric Research Institute. Unfortunately, this lax attitude would prove to be fatal.
Frankie never made it to school, and when he didn't return home that evening, his worried parents reported him missing. The next morning, hundreds of police officers and citizens joined the search, combing through the woods where he was last seen. Initially, investigators ruled out abduction, thinking Frankie might have wandered off. However, they admitted that regardless of the circumstances, he would not have survived the freezing temperatures overnight. Despite their efforts, no trace of him was found. In the days following, several sightings of Frankie were reported to authorities, but none were legitimate, and weeks passed without any clues to his whereabouts. In response to his disappearance, several families in the area formed a loose network of safe havens, placing signs in their windows to encourage children in danger to seek refuge. Local parents also petitioned the police to take reports of men lurking in the woods more seriously going forward. You think? By mid-February, Frankie had yet to be found. Investigators received a concerning tip from a witness who remembered seeing a car idling near the entrance of the path Frankie would have taken to get to school around 8:30 a.m. on February 8th, the day before he vanished. The vehicle was described as a white sedan, possibly a Chrysler, similar to the car seen at the bus stop before Jacqueline Dunleavy's disappearance a month earlier. Detectives now had to consider the possibility of these two crimes being related.
I don't remember what it was called. Was it called Parent Watch, where you had the sticker in your window and it said, "This is a safe house"?
Neighborhood Watch.
Neighborhood Watch.
Yeah.
I don't know the origin or anything to that, but that's what this reminds me of, is if a kid is in danger or there's a man following them, God forbid, that you have certain houses that you know are on the Neighborhood Watch that you can go to and be safe at. But I always wondered how people got those signs, because did anybody put a sign in their window?
Was it us that just had this conversation? I feel like I just had this conversation with someone that was like, maybe we just enabled a bunch of pedophiles to have kids running to their house.
That's literally what I was thinking of when I just heard that. Was I remember these signs walking home from school and thinking, well, I'm not far from home. Would I actually go up to a neighbor's house if I was in trouble? I don't know. I don't know enough of it. And I don't know if it's Canadian. If it's Canadian, let us know and I can look into it. Maybe do like a little bump of banter or something on this. But it always freaked me out. There was always a little piece of me that said, this isn't safe at its finest core.
Yeah, no, I remember. It would be something very interesting to look into. And it's funny because I just had this conversation with someone, maybe it was my mom, but where it was like, so just like the local pedophile would be like, yeah, I'm part of the Neighborhood Watch.
Come to my house if you're in trouble.
Come to my house if you're in trouble. No trouble here, kids. Yeah, no. I mean, I hope that I just don't have as much faith in humans as I once did. Yeah, we'll definitely look into it. Because it was done, was it done through UNICEF or United Way? Maybe I think United Way. I can see the sign in my head, but it's not.
It's blue.
Yeah.
Had a little house and and an adult and a child little figure on it, which made it that much creepier.
Sorry.
Nuggets tearing apart the couch.
Nuggets tearing apart the couch. But she is here, listening to our story.
And so we continue
as we go.
16-year-old Scott Leishman lived in rural community of West Missouri, not far outside of London. On March 21st, nearly 2 months after 9-year-old Frankie Jensen had vanished, Scott was home from school for spring break and decided to enjoy the warm weather temperatures by doing a little fishing at Thorndale. At around 4 p.m., a witness saw Scott on a country road around Forest City, carrying a fishing pole and a tackle box. He had presumably been hitchhiking, as many teenagers in the area did at that time, and across Canada we've seen that with many cases. The witness further stated that Scott had climbed into a white sedan, much like the one allegedly seen at the sites of both Frankie and Jacqueline's disappearances. His body was found 2 months later near Port Burwell along Lake Erie. Scott was never seen alive again, though his body would not be found for some time. The pathologist determined that he had been strangled into unconsciousness before he entered the water, causing him to drown. He was fully clothed, but it was obvious to investigators that he had been redressed, likely by the killer, because his pants were unzipped and his belt had been put on backwards.
So now we have 2 cases of redressing.
Mm-hmm.
We have the sedan.
Mm-hmm.
We have the area. It's all very local to each other, and the time period.
And the strangulation
Yes, you're right. And the strangulation as well.
So yeah, I can see, like, if we're looking at the confirmation bias, I can see where you're pulling in little strings to say,
are these all together? Yeah. Yeah. 31-year-old Helga Beer, originally from Germany, had immigrated to Canada.
Sweet name from Germany.
Right?
Helga Beer.
So she had immigrated to Canada 7 years earlier and settled in London. After divorcing her husband, she moved back in with her mother and brother and seemed to adapt well to single life. She took a job as a hairdresser in a popular department store and maintained an active social life. On the evening of August 5th, 1968, Helga went out with her friends after work, visiting a few local bars. Later, she returned to the apartment building where she used to live and where some friends still resided, presumably to continue the party. While the details of their activities at the apartment are unclear, witnesses reported seeing Helga's female friend, whom she had gone to visit, leaving the building a few hours later, carrying a suitcase. This woman apparently left town, and she could not be located during the subsequent investigation.
Helga was seen leaving the building at approximately 1 a.m. with a man, described by witnesses as a white male in his mid-20s to early 30s. He had dark hair, an average height, and a husky build, with several witnesses noting the roundness of his face and the width of his nose. The following morning at approximately 6:30 a.m., an employee at a service station on Carling Street noticed a 1963 Volkswagen Beetle backed into a parking space on the property. Unsure as to where the car had come from, the attendant looked into one of the vehicle's windows and spotted what appeared to be a mannequin stuffed into the space between the front and rear seats. Upon opening the Volkswagen door, however, the attendant quickly realized that he was staring at a dead woman rather than a mannequin. Helga had been severely beaten in the face and then strangled. When she was discovered, she was wearing only a blouse and bra, with the rest of her clothing haphazardly scattered around the car's interior. Though an autopsy revealed that she had sexual intercourse shortly before her murder, it was unclear whether she had been raped or if the sex had been consensual.
Authorities were able to determine that Helga had likely been killed elsewhere and then driven to the spot she was found, where she was left in the car half nude, perhaps because her killer had wished to humiliate her. The service station where the vehicle was abandoned was just over 500 yards from Helga's last location. A composite sketch of the man who had been spotted with Helga on the night before her death was made and circulated, but it was far too generic to lead to any particular suspect. Although the police could have gotten at least the blood type from Helga's murderer, since semen was found inside her body, as well as on a pair of her underwear left in the front seat, investigators did not get the sample, which is odd because this is a fairly simple and standard practice, even though they had done so in the case of Jacqueline Dunleavy 7 months prior, and in that case determined that the perpetrator had a type O blood. The investigation later faced criticism for lack of due diligence. Detectives not only failed to gather significant physical evidence from the scene, but also permitted their persons of interest to leave the city or even the country without making efforts to either stop them or clear them of suspicion. And you never hear or know. There's these people, like you could have asked the people in the apartment building, hey, who lived here?
Like, what was the investigation?
Nothing. They were like, oh shit, dead body, murdered, probably elsewhere, then driven back here. I know. It's a very frustrating case. And this one I don't quite, this is one of the ones that I don't see Vanessa's point of this being connected, other than the scruffy man in some sort of within his 20s and 30s. But this one doesn't fit. The time period fits, but this one doesn't fit the same. She was also beaten.
That's
She was
where I was going in
strangled.
my head.
Yeah, she was strangled, but she was also beaten. The other ones weren't beaten.
Mm-hmm. You could argue that it is an increase in violence over time, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
You see that with some serial killers, but I feel like we'll get into it. but no, I totally see where you're coming from.
Yeah,
and I get your tone of where we have come from. Is there for a city serial killer? That's a mouthful. Or did the cases just get linked because somebody was trying to link them together? Yeah. It's an interesting theory, and I think it's fair to highlight it and say, is this a possibility? Mm-hmm. It keeps these murders where there's little to no investigation alive. People are still talking about it, but it can also pigeonhole you into thinking that it's all done by the same person. So there's definitely some concerns with thinking it's a serial killer.
Absolutely. And yeah, the investigation is extremely frustrating because there wasn't one. They determined she was murdered somewhere else. And they're like, sorry, Helga.
Case closed.
Sorry, Helga Beer. You deserve better.
Yeah, Helga, you did. 19-year-old Linda White had recently moved from Burlington to London to attend Western University's Huron College. She lived in a rented house on Argyle Street with some former high school classmates. Although the residence was a half an hour walk from campus, Linda enjoyed living there with her friends and appreciated being close to her typing tutor's home. As winter set in, Linda began getting rides to and from class with two boys that she knew. They typically dropped her off near her tutor's place, just 2 blocks from her house. On November 13th, 1968, after competing... Nope. Sorry.
It's all good.
I have a hair in my nose. On November 13th, 1968, after completing a French midterm around 7 p.m., Linda asked some friends if they wanted to unwind at the CPR Tavern, a regular student hangout. When no one joined her, she got into a car with her 2 male friends, who dropped her off as usual and watched her walk away. That night, Linda's roommates were out, so no one found it unusual that she didn't show up to the campus pubs, assuming she had gone straight home. The next morning, concerns grew when friends saw Linda's bed had not been slept in, and there were no clues to her whereabouts. Her roommates contacted her brother John, who drove from Burlington to search for her. An extensive search of the campus and inquiries among Linda's friends garnered no leads. Covering all bases, John visited the nearest train station and showed a photo of Linda to the ticket booth attendant. The attendant reported that Linda had boarded a train to Toronto, but when John searched the train, he found no sign of her. Meanwhile, Linda's parents arrived and helped search the Argyle house again. This time they discovered several pieces of Linda's clothing balled up under her bed's comforter. The clothes weren't damaged or stained, but their concealment was troubling, suggesting Linda might have returned to change clothes for some unknown reason. Finally, about 24 hours after she was last seen, the White family reported Linda missing. Despite the city's recent crime wave, the police, they're not overly concerned, assuming she had just run away voluntarily. That's their go-to.
Yeah, it always is, I know.
Ugh. Linda's fate would remain a mystery for 4.5 years.
11-year-old Robert Bruce Stapleton, according to his stepfather, supposedly left his home on Piccadilly Street on June 7, 1969, and was never seen alive again. Despite the extensive media coverage of other recent child murders in the area, the disappearance of Robert Stapleton received surprisingly little attention, with scant details about the circumstances of his disappearance. There seemed to be a thorough search effort in the weeks following his disappearance. There seemed to be a thorough search effort in the weeks following his disappearance, but it remains unclear who officially reported him missing and when. On September 23rd, his body was discovered in a wooded area less than 4 miles from his home. Though the recent murders of Frankie Jensen and Leishman would lead detectives to believe that the deaths were most likely linked, they were hindered by that fact that Robert's remains had no signs of violence, and there was no obvious cause of death. Further, unlike the cases of the two previously murdered boys, Robert was found partially concealed on land and not in the water. He was also lacking the pink tissue signature present in the case of Jacqueline Dunleavy, as well as a few later murders in this probable series. And less than 2 weeks later, London would see yet another shocking murder of a young teenager, Jackie English.
So I take back my thoughts of escalation.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you see escalation in serial killers, it starts small, petty crimes. They may kill animals.
Yeah.
They may torture. They might rape. And then they move to murder. And based on what their MO is how they murder. And sometimes that escalates. You very rarely see a digression in how somebody is murdered unless there's the possibility where the murderer was like somebody intervened or they could have got caught or they get spooked. That's when you kind of see it, but you see it up until a point, not that they've been murdered and they've been left. So that is interesting.
Yes.
An interesting piece. So Jackie English was a charismatic young woman. Jackie had short, dark hair at the time of her death. On October 4th, 1969, 15-year-old Jackie English was waitressing at the Metropolitan at the Treasure Island Plaza, which is just outside of London. She finished her shift around 10:30 p.m. and headed up Wellington Road to catch a bus. As she was crossing Highway 401 overpass, a witness reported seeing Jackie get into a car, described alternatively, this time, was a blue sedan with a single occupant, or a white sedan with two people, which had halted in the middle of the bridge. It might have been blue with one or white with two. What?
Yeah.
As I read that, I was like,
yeah.
My cadence and my tone is going a little odd because this is not what I was expecting to be reading.
They're very, very different. I know, which is so frustrating for the family too.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
And then because it's a possibility that it was white, it gets connected to all of these other murders where it may have nothing to do with them and you're not looking in the right places because you're pigeonholed.
And in all fairness, how many people drove sedans in the 60s, 70s?
And not just that, but still today, any factory, there's cat over the factory color of cars and trucks where you don't get the bonus Apple Play and you don't get the heated seats and you don't get the tailgate, they're white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the factory setting is white.
Yeah.
So the majority of cars that you see on the road are white.
Yes, big facts.
It's not hot pink and three people saw a hot pink sedan and you're like, these can't be connected. There's hot pink sedans everywhere.
Yeah, big facts.
It remains uncertain whether the driver was an acquaintance of hers or maybe just a random motorist she appeared to trust without reason. However, it is highly likely that the driver was her killer. This was the last time anyone saw her. Due to her family's financial struggles, Jackie had been living with friends and no one immediately reported her missing. However, her concerned father finally contacted the police on the evening of October 5th after learning from her roommates that she hadn't returned home. For 4 more agonizing days, there was no sign of her. On the 5th, Jackie's nude body was found by 2 duck hunters in Big Otter Creek. As the remains appeared far too fresh to have been in the water for 5 days, it was theorized that her body had been kept at some other location and then dumped the night before it was discovered. She had been sexually assaulted and had been struck in the head by an unknown object, which was determined to be her cause of death. 2 separate semen samples were found on her body and her clothes. Her clothes were found scattered around the county roads in Oxford County and Elgin County, and brown penny loafers were found neatly placed beside a pond at Lover's Lane, just west of her body.
So not the same kind of murder whatsoever.
Not at all.
Not even a little bit.
Not at all.
The only real clue to go off in this case was Jackie's diary, which detailed her daily routines and was found amongst her belongings. In her diary, investigators found a picture of a mystery man whose identity remains a mystery still to this day.
I always find that
I
wild.
know.
Like Reet Gervatson's killed. Like nobody knew who
Mhm.
these men were.
Yeah.
If you go back and listen to LA Woman, we talk about something very, very similar. Nobody.
That's the thing. I'm very new here in Florida. I have neighbors that have their garage open all the time. You know, God forbid, I'm gonna knock on wood here. God forbid I go missing and they talk to my neighbors. They may not know me, but they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that was she lived next door." Like,
Yeah.
I don't know much about her, but she left. You know, like they could give some sort of a something. I don't even know
Yeah.
these people's names, but I could give the same thing about them.
Mhm.
So it's crazy to me that they have a physical picture and nothing. So, but we'll talk about it.
Oh, Brett.
Yes. So in 1971, the Ontario Provincial Police, or OPP, did, however, reveal a suspect in this murder. A 21-year-old man named David Bottomer, who resided in Tilsonburg, a town about 50 kilometers southeast of London. David confessed to raping and killing another woman and was convicted in 1972, but he only served 10 years.
Of course he did.
Yeah. And there's a bit of like a weird, why did he only serve 10 years? What's the deal there? Did he give up some other thing? Like it's weird. There's no real answer. Yeah. His current whereabouts are unclear, but former police officer and criminologist Michael Arntfield has stated that David seems to be a compelling suspect in the death of Jackie English as well, especially considering that witnesses describe spotting a man bearing the same resemblance to David at the Metropolitan store talking to Jackie on the night she vanished. Jackie's murder is still unsolved, and there's a Facebook page dedicated to her in the hopes that even after 55 years, there can be some form of closure for her family. So now that we have all of the information,
Okay.
this is all the information. What do we think? Like the similarities between the cases and victim profiles are so unclear with this case. The young children were not, the younger boys were not molested or sexually tampered with.
Mhm.
The women were
Mhm.
in all the cases, except for Helga Beer. It could have been consensual sex. They couldn't determine that.
Right.
So, but there's still some sort of sexual inclusion in it.
Mhm.
So when I originally started researching this case, I set out to basically talk about how dangerous London kind of was during this
Yes.
time period. But I kept stumbling over this theory that all of these cases were connected. However, I am not sure that I agree with this. Other than their location and this possible recurring sedan sighting, that's really what we have. They all died in somewhat different manners. I mean, what do you think?
Oh, it's so hard because in doing this podcast, let's say this was 2 years ago and you laid out all the cases for me, I would want to piece them together. I would want to say, yeah, London had a serial killer, hands down. This person, Criminal Minds BAU unit, we're going to decipher who this person was.
Yeah.
But now that we've done this for a year and we've seen very similar serial killer cases, not one that I can recount has been so off with the MO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. I think humans love puzzles. We love to be able to solve something. This also would mean that if we think that if we do have the Forest City killer, if we find the answer to one, all of these cases are solved. And I just don't think that's the case. I think that there was a killer for Jackie English, Jacqueline Dunleavy, Helga Beer, maybe. Linda White. I think that we can kind of connect those. But Bruce Stapleton, Frankie Jensen, and I don't think that they're the same. I don't think they're the same. I respectfully disagree with this theory.
Yeah, I really wanted to come into this and be like, okay, fresh set of eyes, somebody who's listening to it for the first time. I'm going to be able to maybe play the devil's advocate and to say, but you didn't think of this. But did you hear this connection? I wasn't able to do that, and I was really trying to piece together what that puzzle looked like. I was in my brain, I was the guy with the meme with all the things strung up. That's what we need as our background.
We need a background where we, yes.
is the crime serial case with the strings and the buttons. But I just...
Yeah, I don't see it in this one. I wanted to. I mean, she wrote a whole book. Yeah. And you can buy and order the book, The Forest City Killer.
We mentioned it at the beginning.
Her name is Vanessa Brown. We did mention at the beginning. And she worked very hard. She did. She worked very hard to connect them. And I fully respect it. This one I don't agree with. And usually I do. Usually I can kind of see it, but I just think there's a couple different ones. So,
and I think also because I've been on the London rabbit hole as well, I'm like, but do you realize how much was going on in London at this time with organized crime, with other cases, with motorcycle clubs? There was so much going on at this time, and clearly the police were very inept in many of these cases. So it's difficult when you're trying to put cases together from a philosophical point of view rather than an evidence point of view. And I think that's where this falls into.
Yeah. So regardless of your thoughts, whether there is one person responsible or multiple, I do think it's clear, and as Kayla has alluded to, that London was not as idyllic as the surrounding forests may have led you to believe.
Come back in 2 weeks. I'm going to give you all the details. I'm actually really excited about the cases that I'm covering in those episodes. It is not the episode that I wanted to do for Friday the 13th, but it's the episode that I did, and it turned into a two-parter, and we're going to go down the London rabbit hole together. If you're into motorcycles, if you're into Friday the 13th, you're going to want to come back.
Oh, I'm excited. I don't know this, but I was here when she excitedly was like, maybe I have to make this into a two-parter. So I'm excited to learn more as well. Cool. So, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. Hopefully you got all cozied up on the Chesterfield, on your own Chesterfield or couch or chair, or if you're listening to us on your way into work and we are in your car. I hope that you enjoyed it. Like I said, we've got the big changes. Buy us a coffee. You can do one-time support, couple coffees. You can become part of the Chesterfield Society and get all of that delicious, delicious, delicious bonus content of Bunk Bed Banter and International Oddities, which I love doing. Kayla loves doing. We talk about so much nonsense on Bunk Bed Banter. You just don't want to miss it. You just don't want to miss
it. It's a good one. And I'm really also excited about the interface of Buy Me a Coffee. It's a lot different than Patreon. It feels a little bit more personal. We are going to not just put up our bi-monthly Bunk Bed Banters and our monthly International Oddities. We're going to give you exclusive look into Tales from the Chesterfield because we want to be able to give back even more to you all as much as we can do, wherever we can find an opportunity. We're going to give you an inside look. We're going to give you opportunities to engage, give us cases that you want us to do, give us ideas for Bunk Bed Banter and International Oddities, and we want to make it as interactive as possible. So for $5, you can buy us 2 double doubles. Now with the increase, it could have been 5 small double doubles back in the day, but
not anymore.
2 double doubles. We'll buy them. We'll bring them in. We'll share a coffee on the Chesterfield during our episodes, or you can be a part of the society for $5 a month and get all the goodies. So that's dropping December 1st at midnight.
At midnight, yes.
So please come buy us a coffee. we've been able to buy a new webcam with the money from Patreon.
Yes.
All of our Patreons, we love you so much. We hope you come over to our new Buy Me a Coffee set. But we're trying to upgrade for year number 2 so that we can not just build the foundation, but now give you all the good stuff that you're looking for.
Absolutely. So until next time, stay safe, stay cozy, and we'll see you back on the Chesterfield next week, eh? Bye.
Bye, babes.